You thought you healed, but something still feels off. You've told yourself you've moved on. You've tried to be stronger, more aware, more in control. You've said things like, "I'm not going back to that version of me." And for a while, it feels true. You're calmer, more distant from the past, less emotional. But then something small happens. Someone doesn't reply the way you expected. Someone's tone changes, someone pulls back just a little, and suddenly everything shifts. Your mind starts racing. You feel that familiar tension in your chest. You start overthinking. You start questioning. And before you even realize it, you're right back in a place you thought you left. And that confuses you. Because part of you is thinking, "I thought I healed. I thought I was past this. So why do I still feel this way?" You don't say it out loud, but you feel it. That frustration, that quiet disappointment in yourself, because it feels like no matter how much you grow, something keeps pulling you back. And it's not always obvious. Sometimes it shows up in relationships. You meet someone new. At first, everything feels different. They're kind, they're consistent, they treat you better than what you used to. But slowly, something inside you starts to feel uncomfortable. You start questioning things that don't need to be questioned. You feel anxious when there's no real reason. You pull back or hold back, and you don't fully understand why. Other times, it shows up in how you react. You stay quiet when something bothers you, or you react more strongly than you expected. And afterward, you sit there thinking, "Why did I do that? Why couldn't I just handle it differently?" And then there are moments where nothing even happens, but you still feel heavy, drained, emotionally tired, like your mind never fully rests. And you start asking yourself questions like, why do I keep attracting the same people? Why do I overreact or shut down? Why do I still feel like this even after everything I've been through? And the hardest part is this. You don't have a clear answer, so you start turning it inward. Maybe something is wrong with me. Maybe I'm just too emotional. Maybe I just haven't healed properly. But what if that's not true? What if this isn't about something being wrong with you, but something that happened to you that your mind and body learned from? Because here's the truth, most people never explain clearly. You didn't just experience things in your past. You adapted to them. You learned how to protect yourself. You learned how to respond. You learned what to expect from people. And those patterns didn't just disappear. They stayed quietly in the way you think, in the way you react, in the way you feel, even when nothing is happening. And that's why it feels confusing. Because on the surface, you've moved on. But underneath, your system is still operating from what it learned. And once you understand that, something shifts. Because now it's no longer, "What's wrong with me?" It becomes, "What did I learn that I'm still carrying?" And that question changes everything. Because it moves you from blame to understanding. And understand is where healing actually begins. But before we go deeper, pause for a second. Because if even a part of this feels familiar, if you're starting to see yourself in ways you couldn't explain before, stay with this. And if you're serious about understanding yourself at a deeper level, subscribe and turn on notifications, because this is where real healing begins. And if something in this already resonates with you, something you felt but never fully understood, share it in the comments. Sometimes putting it into words is the first step to seeing it clearly. And you might realize you're not the only one who feels this way. Now let's go deeper, because understanding that something is happening is only the beginning. The real shift happens when you understand what emotional trauma actually is and how it's been shaping your life without you realizing it. And once you see that clearly, you won't look at yourself the same way again. Chapter 2. What emotional trauma really is. Most people think trauma has to be something extreme, something obvious, something everyone would agree was bad enough. But that's not how it works.
Emotional trauma is not defined by how big something looked on the outside.
It's defined by how it was experienced on the inside. Two people can go through the same situation and walk away completely different. One moves on, the other carries it for years, not because they're weaker, but because of how their mind and body processed it. So let's simplify this. Emotional trauma is not just what happened to you. It's what your mind and body learned to expect because of what happened. That's it. It's patterns, stored responses, automatic reactions that were built in moments when you didn't feel safe. Not always physically unsafe, but emotionally. Moments where you felt unseen, unheard, rejected, criticized, abandoned, and in those moments your system adapted. You didn't sit down and decide how to respond. It happened automatically. You learned. Stay quiet, it's safer. Don't trust too quickly. Be careful what you say. Don't show too much, expect people to leave. And those lessons didn't stay in the past, they became your patterns. Let's make this real. Imagine growing up in a home where emotions weren't safe. Maybe you were told, you're too sensitive, stop overreacting, just be quiet. So over time, you learn to suppress how you feel. Now, fast forward, you're in a relationship. Something bothers you, but instead of expressing it, you stay quiet. Not because you don't care, but because your system learned. Speaking up is unsafe. That's emotional trauma. Not the event itself, but the pattern it created. Or maybe you experienced inconsistency. Someone who was there and then not. Someone who gave attention and then pulled it away. And you never knew what to expect. So now, when someone takes longer to reply, your mind reacts, not to the present moment, but to what it learned in the past. And suddenly, you feel anxious. You overthink. You assume something is wrong, even when nothing actually is. That's emotional trauma, not because something is happening now, but because your system remembers what it felt like before. And this is the part most people don't realize. Your mind is not trying to hurt you. It's trying to protect you. Every reaction you have, every trigger, every emotional response is your system saying, be careful, we've felt this before. But here's the problem. Your system doesn't know the difference between then and now. It reacts based on memory, not reality. So something small today can feel big, not because it is, but because it connects to something unresolved. And that's why you might feel like, I know this isn't a big deal, but it still affects me. That's the disconnect. Logic says one thing, but your emotional system says another. And when those two don't match, it feels confusing, frustrating, even exhausting, because you're trying to control something that feels automatic. But once you understand this, something changes, because now you stop seeing your reactions as random. You start seeing them as patterns. Patterns that were learned, patterns that can be unlearned. And that's where hope comes in. Because if something was learned, it can be changed. Not instantly, not perfectly, but gradually and gently. Because healing is not about forcing yourself to be different. It's about understanding why you are the way you are and working with it, not against it. So the next time you feel triggered, instead of thinking, what's wrong with me? Try asking, what did this remind me of? That question will take you deeper than judgment ever will. And if this is starting to make things clearer, if you're beginning to understand yourself in a way you didn't before, stay with this. And if you're serious about healing at the root, not just managing symptoms, subscribe and turn on notifications, because this is where real understanding begins. And if something in this chapter felt familiar, something you've experienced but never had words for, share it in the comments. You might realize you're not alone in this. Now we go deeper, because understanding what emotional trauma is only the beginning. The real shift happens when you start recognizing how it's actually showing up in your life. And some of these signs are so subtle, you might not even realize they've been there the whole time. Chapter 3. Sing 1. You keep attracting the same type of person. This is one of the hardest patterns to admit, because at first, it doesn't look like a pattern. It looks like coincidence, bad luck, or just the wrong person again. But over time, you start noticing something. The faces change, the names change, but the feeling feels familiar. You meet someone new, and at the beginning, it feels different. They seem kind, they seem interested, they seem like they're not like the others. And for a moment, you relax.
You think? Maybe this time is different, but slowly something starts to feel off. Not immediately, not clearly, just subtly. They become inconsistent, they pull back.
They change tone, they make you question things, and suddenly, you're in the same emotional place again, overthinking, waiting, trying to figure out what changed, trying to figure out what you did wrong. And this is the part you don't say out loud, but you feel it. Why does this keep happening to me? And deeper than that, why do I keep choosing people like this? Because at some point, it stops feeling random. It starts feeling like a pattern. And that's exactly what it is. But here's the part most people don't understand. You're not consciously choosing the same type of person. You're subconsciously drawn to what feels familiar, even if that familiarity is unhealthy, because your mind doesn't choose what's best for you. It chooses what it recognizes. Let that sink in. If inconsistency felt normal to you at some point, you will feel drawn to it again. If emotional distance felt familiar, you will unconsciously accept it. If you had to work for attention, you may feel more connected to people who make you earn it. Not because you want to suffer, but because your system says, this feels like something I know, and what we know feels safe, even when it isn't. That's the pattern. Not logic, familiarity. Let's make this even clearer. You meet two people. One is consistent. They communicate clearly. They show up. They don't create confusion. The other is unpredictable, hot and cold, sometimes present, sometimes distant. Now, logically, the first person is healthier, but emotionally, you might feel more pulled toward the second. Why? Because unpredictability feels familiar, and familiar feels real, even when it's not good for you. And this is where trauma shows up quietly, not in obvious pain, but in repeated patterns. Because your system is not asking, is this healthy? It's asking, does this feel like something I recognize? And if the answer is yes, you stay longer than you should. You tolerate more than you should. You hope longer than you should. And that's where the cycle continues. But here's where things begin to shift. When you stop asking, why do I keep attracting these people? And start asking, why do I feel comfortable staying? That question changes everything, because it brings the focus back to you. Not in a blaming way, but in an understanding way. Because once you see the pattern, you can start interrupting it. Not perfectly, but consciously, and that's how healing begins. So what do you do with this? You don't try to change everything overnight. You start by noticing. Simple action step. Next time you meet someone new, pause and ask yourself, does this feel calm or does it feel familiar? There's a difference. Calm feels steady. Familiar often feels intense, uncertain, slightly anxious. And that distinction matters because calm is where safety begins, not intensity. Another step. Write down your past relationship patterns, not just what happened, but how it felt. Were they consistent? Were they distant? Did you feel secure or uncertain? And once you see the pattern clearly, you won't be able to ignore it anymore. That awareness alone will start changing your choices, slowly, but powerfully. And if this sign feels a little too familiar, if you're starting to recognize a pattern you couldn't explain before, stay with this. And if you're serious about breaking patterns that keep repeating in your life, subscribe and turn on notifications, because this is where real healing starts to take shape. And if this chapter felt like your experience in a way you didn't expect, share it in the comments, because sometimes seeing it written out is what makes it real. And it might help someone else realize they're not alone in it. But this is just one way emotional trauma shows up. There's another pattern, one that feels completely different, but is just as powerful. Because instead of repeating externally, it shows up internally, in how you react, in ways you don't always expect. Chapter 4. Sing 2. You overact, then regret it. This one is quieter, but heavier, because it doesn't just happen in the moment, it stays with you afterward. You react, and then later you sit with it, replaying it, thinking, why did I respond like that? Why did that affect me so much? Why couldn't I just stay calm? And there's this feeling that's hard to explain. Not just frustration, not just confusion, but disappointment in yourself. Because in the moment, it felt real. It felt justified. It felt like you had to respond. But after, when everything settles, you see it differently. And that's what makes it hard, because part of you knows, that wasn't really me. Let's make this real. Someone says something small, not even that serious. Maybe it's a tone, maybe it's a comment, maybe it's how they said it, and instantly you feel it. That shift, that tension, that emotional spike, and before you even process it, you react. You respond quickly. You become defensive. You say something sharper than you intended, or you shut down completely, and in that moment, you feel like, I had to say something, but later, you sit with it, and something feels off. Because now, you're not reacting anymore, you're observing, and what you see doesn't feel like who you want to be. That's the pattern. React first, understand later, and regret in between. But here's what most people don't realize. You're not overreacting because the moment is that big. You're overreacting because it connects to something deeper, something unresolved, something your system remembers. Because emotional trauma doesn't just sit quietly, it gets activated, triggered, and when it does, your response is not just about now, it's about every moment that felt similar before. So that small comment doesn't feel small, it feels layered, heavy, charged, because your system is reacting to past criticism, past rejection, past emotional pain, all at once. And that's why your reaction feels bigger than the situation. Because it is. It's not just about this moment, it's about everything it reminds you of. But in real time, you don't see that. You just feel intensity, and you respond to it automatically. That's why it feels like, I couldn't control it. Because in that moment, your emotional system took over. Not because you're weak, but because it learned to protect you that way. React fast, defend quickly, shut down if needed. Those were survival responses, but now they show up in situations where they're no longer needed. And that creates a disconnect. Because part of you knows this isn't that serious, but your body doesn't agree. And when those don't match, you react, then regret, then repeat. But this is where healing begins, not by judging yourself for reacting, but by understanding why you did. Because once you see that clearly, you can start changing the pattern. Not by forcing yourself to be calm, but by creating space before the reaction. Simple action step. The next time you feel that emotional spike, don't rush to respond. Just notice it, that moment, that feeling rising, that urge to react immediately. And instead of following it, pause, even for a few seconds. Because that pause is where everything changes. In that space, ask yourself, is this about right now, or does this feel familiar? That question will slow everything down. It won't remove the feeling instantly, but it will give you awareness, and awareness creates choice. Another step. After a moment like this happens, instead of judging yourself, reflect on it. Ask, what did this remind me of? What did I feel in that moment? What was I trying to protect? Because every reaction is protecting something. Understanding that will help you respond differently next time. And that's the goal, not perfection, progress. Because over time, those pauses get longer. Your reactions get softer, your control gets stronger, and that pattern starts to break. And if this feels familiar, if you've ever had moments where you reacted and then wished you handled it differently, stay with this. And if you're serious about becoming someone who understands their emotions instead of being controlled by them, subscribe and turn on notifications, because this is where real emotional healing begins. And if this chapter felt like something you've experienced in a way you've never fully explained before, share it in the comments, because sometimes saying it out loud is the first step to changing it. But this is just one way trauma shows up, because for some people, it's not about reacting too much. It's about not reacting at all, about shutting down even when something matters. Chapter 5. Sing 3. You shut down instead of expressing yourself. This one doesn't look like a reaction, but it is, just in a different form. Because instead of reacting outwardly, you go inward, you get quiet, you withdraw, you hold things in. And from the outside, it can look like control, like you're calm, like you're handling it well, but inside something else is happening. You feel it. That tightness, that build-up, that moment where you want to say something, but don't. And afterward, you sit with it, thinking, I should have said something. Why didn't I speak up? Why do I always do this? And that question can feel frustrating, because it's not that you don't know what you want to say. You do. You just don't feel safe saying it. Let's make this real. Someone does something that bothers you, not in a huge way, but enough. You feel it immediately. That discomfort, that internal reaction. And for a moment you think, I should say something. But then another thought comes in. Maybe it's not a big deal. I don't want to make it awkward. I don't want to start something. So you let it go, or at least you tell yourself you do, but you don't actually let it go. You carry it. You think about it later. You replay the moment. You feel it again, and slowly it builds, not in a loud way, but quietly, until one day it comes out, maybe in a way that feels bigger than expected, or maybe it never comes out at all, and just turns into distance. Emotional distance, because this is what shutting down does. It doesn't remove the emotion, it stores it, and over time, that storage becomes weight. But here's what's really happening underneath. You learned that expressing yourself wasn't safe. Maybe when you spoke up before, you were dismissed, ignored, told you were too much, or made to feel like your feelings didn't matter. So your system adapted. It learned, stay quiet, it's safer. Don't say too much, don't risk conflict, and that worked. At some point it protected you, but now it's limiting you, because the situations have changed, but the response hasn't. So now you stay silent, even when you deserve to be heard. You hold things in, even when they matter. You avoid discomfort, but create something heavier over time. And that's where the frustration comes from, because part of you knows, I should be able to express this, but another part says, don't. And that internal conflict keeps repeating. But here's the shift. Shutting down is not weakness, it's protection. But it's outdated protection. It's a response that made sense before, but no longer serves you now. And once you see it that way, you stop judging it. You start working with it, gently. Because this isn't about suddenly becoming someone who says everything perfectly. It's about starting small, rebuilding safety in your own voice, Simple action step. The next time something bothers you, don't jump straight to silence, but also don't force a big reaction. Start with something small, even if it's just, hey, that didn't sit right with me. It doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be honest. Because expression is a skill. And like any skill, it builds over time. Another step. Notice when you shut down, not later. In the moment, that feeling of pulling back, that urge to stay quiet, and instead of immediately following it, pause. And ask yourself, am I staying quiet because I want to or because I feel like I have to? That question creates awareness, and awareness creates choice. And over time, those small choices change the pattern. You don't go from silent to expressive overnight, but you go from automatic silence to intentional response. And that changes everything, because your voice starts to feel safer, your emotions start to feel valid, and your relationships become more real, not built on what you hold in, but on what you're able to express. And if this feels familiar, if you've ever held things in and wished you handled it differently later, stay with this. And if you're serious about becoming someone who feels safe expressing themselves, subscribe and turn on notifications, because this is where real emotional safety is built. And if this chapter felt like your experience in a way you've never fully put into words, share it in the comments, because sometimes saying it is the first step to changing it. But this is just one way trauma shows up, because for some people, it's not about holding things in. It's about what happens after, when your mind doesn't let things go. Chapter 6. Sing 4. You overthink small interactions. This one doesn't always look like trauma. It looks like thinking, analyzing, just trying to understand. But it goes deeper than that, because it doesn't stop. A simple interaction happens, and your mind stays there. Long after the moment is over, you replay it. You rethink what you said. You rethink what they said. You analyze the tone, the timing, the words, and you start asking questions like, did that sound wrong? Did they take that the wrong way? Why did they respond like that? And suddenly, something small feels bigger than it actually was. Let's make this real. You send a message. They reply, but something feels different, shorter, colder, or maybe just not the same. And now your mind starts working. Are they upset? Did I say something? Did something change? You read the message again and again, trying to find something that explains the feeling, but there's nothing clear, just a sense, and that sense keeps you stuck. Now your energy shifts, your focus changes, you feel slightly uneasy for something that might not even be real. That's overthinking, but not just overthinking, it's emotional patterning, because what's happening here is not just about the message, it's about what it represents to you. Uncertainty, disconnection, possible rejection, and your system doesn't like uncertainty, so it tries to solve it. By thinking, by analyzing, by trying to figure it out. But here's the problem. Not everything needs to be figured out. And not everything has a deeper meaning. But your system is trained to believe it does, because at some point, small changes mattered. Maybe growing up, you had to read between the lines. You had to notice tone shifts. You had to be aware of moods. You had to sense when something was off, because it helped you stay safe. So now your mind does that automatically. It scans, it analyzes, it looks for patterns, even when there's no real threat. And that creates a loop. Something small happens. You think about it, you create a meaning. That meaning creates a feeling, and that feeling reinforces the thought, and now you're stuck in it. Not because something happened, but because your mind won't let it go. And that's exhausting. Because you're not just experiencing life, you're constantly analyzing it. And that takes energy. Mental energy, emotional energy, and over time it drains you. But here's the shift. Overthinking is not a thinking problem. It's a safety problem. Your mind is trying to create certainty, so you don't feel uncomfortable. But certainty is not always available, and trying to force it creates more anxiety. So instead of trying to solve every thought, you learn to step back from them. Not everything needs an answer. Not everything needs meaning. Not everything needs your attention. And that's where control begins. Simple action step. The next time you catch yourself overthinking, pause and ask, do I actually have enough information, or am I filling in the gaps? That question will interrupt the loop, because most of the time you're filling in gaps with assumptions, with fears, with past experiences. Another step, instead of replaying the situation, ground yourself in what's real, what actually happened, not what you think it means, just the facts, because facts are neutral, interpretations create emotion, and separating the two gives you clarity. And finally, practice letting things be incomplete. Not every situation needs closure. Not every interaction needs to be fully understood. Sometimes, the healthiest response is to let it go, even if your mind wants to hold on to it, because peace doesn't come from figuring everything out. It comes from not needing to. And if this feels familiar, if you've ever found yourself stuck in your own thoughts, replaying moments that shouldn't matter this much, stay with this. And if you're serious about quieting your mind and breaking patterns that drain your energy, subscribe and turn on notifications, because this is where real emotional clarity begins. And if this chapter felt like your daily experience in a way you've never fully explained before, share it in the comments, because sometimes putting it into words is what helps you step out of it. But this is just one way trauma shows up. Because for some people, it's not just about what they think, it's about what they carry. Other people's emotions, other people's problems, other people's responsibilities. Chapter 7. Sing 5. You feel responsible for other people's emotions. This one feels like kindness, like empathy, like being a good person. But underneath, it's something heavier. Because it's not just that you care about how people feel, it's that you feel responsible for it. And that changes everything. You walk into a room and immediately sense the mood. Someone feels off, someone is quiet, someone's energy shifts just slightly, and you feel it. Not just notice it, you absorb it. And without even thinking, you start adjusting. You become softer, more careful, more aware of what you say. You try to keep things calm, balanced, smooth, because something in you is saying, don't make it worse. Or, even deeper, fix it. Let's make this real. You're talking to someone. They seem distant, short in their responses, a little off. And instead of thinking, maybe they're just having a day, your mind goes somewhere else. Did I do something? Did I say something wrong? Are they upset with me? And now, you feel responsible. So you try to adjust. You over-explain. You become extra nice. You try to bring the energy back up. You try to fix something that might not even have anything to do with you. And by the end of it, you feel drained. Not because of what happened, but because of what you carried. And this shows up in deeper ways too. In relationships, you take on emotional weight that isn't yours. Someone is upset and you feel like you need to make it better. Someone is distant and you feel like you need to close the gap. Someone is struggling and you feel like you need to hold it for them. Even when it costs you. Even when it exhausts you. Even when it leaves you empty. And this is the part you don't always say out loud, but you feel it. Why do I always feel like this is on me? Why do I always feel like I have to fix things? Why do I feel guilty even when I didn't do anything wrong? Because guilt shows up quickly, even in situations where it doesn't belong. And that's not random. That's a pattern, a learned response. Because at some point, you learned that other people's emotions were your responsibility. Maybe growing up, you had to keep the peace. Maybe someone's mood affected everything. Maybe conflict felt overwhelming. So you adapted. You became aware. You became careful. You became the one who adjusted. The one who softened things. The one who made sure everything stayed okay. And that worked. At the time, it protected you. It helped you avoid tension. It helped you feel safe. But now, it follows you into every interaction. Even when it's not needed. Even when it's not healthy. Because now, you don't just care about people, you carry them. And that's where the exhaustion comes from. Because you're not just managing your emotions, you're managing everyone else's too. And that's not sustainable. But here's the shift. You are not responsible for how other people feel. You can care, you can be kind, you can be supportive, but you are not responsible for regulating someone else's emotions. That's theirs, and separating that is where your energy comes back. Simple action step. The next time you feel that pull, that urge to fix, pause and ask yourself, is this actually mine to carry? That question will change everything, because most of the time it's not. Another step. When someone is upset, instead of immediately trying to solve it, just be present. You don't have to fix it. You don't have to absorb it. You can simply say, I hear you, and leave it there. Because support does not require sacrifice. And finally, notice when guilt shows up. Especially when you haven't done anything wrong. That's a signal, not truth. A signal that an old pattern is being activated. And instead of following it, you observe it. Because awareness breaks automatic behavior. And over time, you stop carrying what isn't yours. You stop adjusting for everything. You stop feeling responsible for every shift in energy around you. And something changes. You feel lighter, more grounded, more in control of your own space, and that's where emotional safety begins. Not in controlling others, but in no longer being controlled by them. And if this feels familiar, if you've been carrying more than you realize, stay with this. And if you're serious about protecting your energy and building emotional boundaries that actually work, subscribe and turn on notifications, because this is where real emotional strength is built. And if this chapter felt like your experience, in a way you've never fully said out loud, share it in the comments, because sometimes recognizing it is the first step to releasing it. But this is just one way trauma shows up. Because for some people, it's not just about carrying others. It's about what happens when things actually feel good, when things are calm and something in you still doesn't trust it. Chapter 8. Sing 6. You struggle to trust, even when things are good. This one is confusing, because nothing is wrong, but something still feels off. Things are calm, stable, maybe even healthy, and instead of feeling relaxed, you feel uneasy, not in a loud way, but quietly in the background, like something is about to change, like something might go wrong, even when there's no real reason to think that. Let's make this real. You're in a relationship, and this time it's different. They're consistent, they communicate clearly, they show up. There's no confusion, no emotional roller coaster, and yet you find yourself waiting, not for something good, but for something to go wrong. You notice small changes. You question normal behavior. You wonder, is this real? Is this going to last? When is it going to change? And sometimes you don't even realize it, but you start pulling back, just a little. You don't fully open up. You don't fully relax into it. Because something in you is saying, don't trust this too much. And that feeling can be hard to explain, because logically, you know things are okay, but emotionally you don't feel safe yet. That's the pattern. Not a lack of trust in others, but a lack of safety in yourself. Because trust is not just about the other person. It's about your system's ability to feel safe in stability. And if your past was unpredictable, then stability can feel unfamiliar. And unfamiliar can feel unsafe, even when it's healthy. Let that sink in. If you're used to inconsistency, emotional highs and lows, uncertainty, having to figure things out, then calm can feel strange, almost like something is missing, because your system is used to intensity, used to scanning, used to preparing. So when things are steady, it doesn't relax, it questions, it looks for signs, it waits for the shift, and that creates distance, not because you want to disconnect, but because you don't fully trust the safety yet. And sometimes that leads to something even deeper. You might start testing without realizing it, pulling back slightly, being less available, watching how the other person responds, not consciously, but as a way to confirm, is this safe? And this is where trauma shows up quietly, not in chaos, but in your inability to fully receive calm, because your system is still wired for something else. But here's the shift. There is nothing wrong with you for feeling this way. This is what happens when your system has been trained by unpredictability. It doesn't trust calm immediately. It learns it over time, and that's the key. You don't force trust, you build it gently, consistently, through experience. Simple action step. The next time things feel calm and you notice that discomfort, don't immediately assume something is wrong. Instead, pause and ask yourself, is something actually wrong right now, or am I expecting it to be? That question will ground you, because most of the time you're expecting, not responding. Another step. When you feel the urge to pull back, notice it, that subtle distance, that hesitation, and instead of following it automatically, stay present, even if it feels uncomfortable, because that discomfort is your system adjusting to something new. And finally, allow yourself to experience calm without needing to question it, even if it feels unfamiliar, because calm is not the absence of something, it's the presence of safety. And learning to sit in that is part of healing. Over time, your system begins to recognize, this is okay, this is safe, I don't need to prepare for something to go wrong, and that's when trust changes. Not forced, not assumed, but felt. And if this feels familiar, if you've ever struggled to relax, even when things are going well, stay with this. And if you're serious about building real emotional safety, not just reacting to patterns, subscribe and turn on notifications, because this is where healing becomes real. And if this chapter felt like something you've experienced, but never fully understood, share it in the comments, because sometimes recognizing it is what helps you finally move through it. But this is not the last sign. Because for many people, the deepest impact of emotional trauma is not always in how they react, but in how they feel all the time. even when nothing is happening. Chapter 9. Sing 7. You feel emotionally drained, even when nothing happened. This one is the hardest to explain, because nothing obvious is wrong, nothing big happened, no argument, no conflict, no clear reason, but you still feel it. That heaviness, that quiet exhaustion, like your mind has been running even when you've been still. And you sit there thinking, why do I feel like this? I didn't even do anything, but you did. Just not in a way you can easily see. Because emotional exhaustion doesn't only come from what happens externally. It comes from what's happening internally all the time. Let's make this real. You go through your day, nothing major happens, but you overthink conversations, monitor people's moods, replay small moments, adjust your behavior, hold in how you feel, carry things that aren't yours, and by the end of the day, you feel drained. Not because of one big thing, but because of everything small. And this is what most people don't realize. Your system has been working all day, quietly, constantly, trying to keep you safe, avoid discomfort, prevent rejection, maintain control. And that takes energy, a lot of it. So even when nothing happens, you're still processing, still scanning, still carrying, and that's exhausting. Another example, you spend time around people, you're present, you're engaged, you're fine. But afterward, you feel tired, like you need space, like you need to be alone, not because you don't like them, but because of how much you were managing internally. Your tone, your words, their reactions, the energy in the room, all of it. And your system doesn't get a break because it's always on, always aware, always trying to stay ahead of something, even when there's nothing to stay ahead of. And this is what emotional trauma can look like. Not always dramatic, not always visible, but constant in the background, draining you slowly. And over time, you start to feel it more. That lack of energy, that mental fatigue, that feeling of, I just don't have it in me today. Even when you want to, even when you're trying. And then sometimes you blame yourself. You think, why am I like this? Why am I always tired? Why can't I just feel normal? But this is not about weakness. This is about overload. Emotional overload from patterns that have been running for a long time. And once you understand that, something shifts. Because now, you don't just push through it, you start working with it. Gently, simple action step. The first step is awareness. Start noticing, where is your energy going? Not just physically, emotionally, after certain conversations, after certain thoughts, after certain situations. Ask yourself, did this give me energy or take it? That question will show you patterns. Another step, create small moments of stillness, not distraction, not scrolling, not avoiding, just stillness, even if it's just a few minutes, because your system needs space to settle, to come down, to reset. And finally, start releasing what you're carrying. Not everything needs to stay in your mind. Not everything needs to be held. Some things can be let go, even if your system is used to holding them, because healing is not just about understanding patterns, it's about reducing the weight they create. And over time, that weight gets lighter, not instantly, but gradually, as you become more aware, more intentional, more protective of your energy. And that's when something changes. You don't feel as drained, your mind becomes quieter, your emotions feel more stable, and you start feeling something you may not have felt in a long time, light. And if this feels familiar, if you've ever felt exhausted without knowing why, stay with this. And if you're serious about protecting your energy and creating emotional space in your life, subscribe and turn on notifications, because this is where real healing deepens. And if this chapter felt like your daily experience in a way you couldn't fully explain before, share it in the comments, because sometimes naming it is what helps you start releasing it. Now we've seen the signs, the pattern, the ways emotional trauma shows up in real life, but there's something important you need to understand next, because even when you recognize all of this, healing can still feel hard, confusing, slow, and sometimes like you're not making progress at all. But there's a reason for that. And once you understand it, you'll stop feeling like you're doing something wrong. Chapter 10. Why healing feels harder than it should. This is the part most people don't talk about, because recognizing the patterns is one thing, but actually changing them feels harder than you expected. And that can be frustrating, because now you're aware. You see the signs. You understand your triggers. You catch yourself sometimes, and still, you find yourself slipping back, reacting again, overthinking again, shutting down again, and part of you starts thinking, why is this still happening? I thought I understood this already. Why does it still feel the same sometimes? And if you're not careful, that turns into something deeper, Doubt. Doubt in yourself, doubt in your progress, doubt in whether you're actually healing. But here's what you need to understand. Healing is not just about knowing better. It's about retraining what your system has known for a long time. And that takes time. Because your patterns didn't form overnight. They were repeated, reinforced, experienced over and over again, until they became automatic. So now, when you try to change them, you're not just changing a thought, you're changing a system. And systems don't shift instantly. They shift through repetition, through awareness, through doing something different again and again, even when it feels uncomfortable. And this is where most people struggle, because healing doesn't always feel like progress. Sometimes it feels like resistance. You notice more, you feel more, you become more aware of your reaction, and instead of feeling better immediately, it can feel heavier at first. Because now you're seeing what was always there. And that can feel overwhelming, but that doesn't mean you're going backward. It means you're becoming aware, and awareness comes before change, always. Another reason healing feels hard is because your system prefers what's familiar, even if that familiarity is painful, because familiar feels predictable, and predictable feels safe. So when you start doing something different, setting boundaries, expressing yourself, not reacting the same way, your system reacts. Not because you're doing something wrong, but because you're doing something new. And new feels uncomfortable, uncertain, unstable at first. So part of you wants to go back to what you know, back to what feels easier, even if it's not better. And that's the moment most people misunderstand. They think this feels hard, maybe it's not working. But the truth is, it feels hard because it is working. You're stepping out of a pattern that your system has relied on, and that takes effort. Another reason healing feels difficult is because you expect it to be linear. You think, I'll understand it, I'll apply it, and then I'll be fine. But that's not how it works. Healing moves in cycles. You have moments of clarity, then moments of slipping back, then moments of awareness again. And over time, those moments of awareness become stronger, more frequent, more stable, until one day you realize, I don't react the same way anymore. But you don't notice it all at once. It happens gradually, quietly, in small moments, and that's where people miss it, because they're looking for a big change, instead of noticing small shifts. But those small shifts are everything. Choosing to pause once, choosing not to overthink one situation, choosing to express something small, those moments are progress, even if they don't feel like it yet. So if you've been feeling like, this is harder than I expected, you're not doing it wrong. You're doing it honestly. And honest healing is not quick, it's real. And real lasts. Simple shift. Instead of asking, why am I not fully healed yet? Start asking, am I responding differently than I used to? Even slightly. Because that's what matters. Not perfection, direction. And if your direction is changing, you are healing even if it doesn't feel like it every day. And if this is something you've been struggling with, if you felt like you understand everything but still find it hard to change, stay with this. And if you're serious about real healing, not quick fixes, subscribe and turn on notifications, because this is where real transformation happens. And if this chapter helped you see your process differently, share it in the comments. Because sometimes realizing that you're not behind is exactly what helps you keep going. Now we go deeper, because understanding why healing feels hard is important. But the next step is knowing exactly how to move forward in a way that feels manageable, real, and sustainable. Chapter 11. How to start healing, step by step. Now we make this real, because understanding your patterns is powerful. But at some point you start asking, what do I actually do now? How do I change this? And this is where most people get stuck again. Not because they don't want to heal, but because it feels overwhelming. Too many emotions, too many patterns, too many things to fix. So instead of moving forward, they freeze, or they try to do everything at once and burn out. So we're not doing that. We're simplifying this into something you can actually follow. Not perfectly, but consistently. Because healing is not about doing everything right. It's about doing the right things over time. So let's break this down. Step 1. Awareness. This is where everything starts. Not change, not action. Awareness. Because you can't change what you don't notice. So instead of trying to fix everything, you start observing your reactions, your thoughts, your triggers. When do you overthink? When do you shut down? When do you feel anxious? And instead of judging it, you simply notice it. This is happening. That's enough, because awareness creates distance, and distance creates control. Step 2. Emotional regulation. This is where you slow things down, because when your emotions spike, your system takes over. So instead of reacting immediately, you regulate, not by forcing yourself to calm down, but by grounding yourself. Slow your breathing, relax your body, pause, even for a few seconds, because that pause interrupts the pattern and gives you space to choose differently. Step 3. Reframing. This is where you challenge your interpretation, because most of your reactions come from what you think something means, not what actually happened. So instead of accepting your first thought, you question it. Is this fact or interpretation? Am I reacting to reality or memory? That shift changes everything because it separates the present from the past. Step 4. Boundaries. This is where healing becomes visible, because awareness alone is not enough. At some point, you have to change how you respond, what you allow, what you accept, what you tolerate. And that's where boundaries come in. Not harsh, not aggressive, clear, simple, honest, saying, that doesn't work for me. I'm not okay with that. This is what I need. And yes, that can feel uncomfortable at first because your system is not used to it. But boundaries protect your healing. Without them, patterns repeat. Step 5. Self-trust. This is the foundation, because everything we've talked about comes back to this. Trusting yourself, trusting your feelings, trusting your decisions, trusting that you can handle things differently now. And that doesn't happen instantly. It builds. Every time you pause, instead of react, express, instead of suppress, choose differently than before. You prove something to yourself. I can handle this. And over time, that becomes belief. Not forced, earned, and that belief changes everything. Because now you don't just understand your patterns, you outgrow them. But here's the truth, you don't have to do all of this perfectly. You don't have to master every step immediately. You just have to start. One moment, one pattern, one different response at a time, because healing is not one big decision, it's a series of small ones, repeated consistently. And those small moments are what create real change. So don't overwhelm yourself. Don't rush it. Just start where you are and move forward gently. And if this is giving you clarity, not just understanding, but direction, stay with this. And if you're serious about building real healing in your life, subscribe and turn on notifications, because this is where transformation becomes practical. And if one of these steps stood out to you, something you feel ready to try, share it in the comments, because sometimes committing to it, even in a small way, is what makes it real. Now we go deeper, because knowing the steps is one thing, but applying them in real life is where everything changes. In conversations, in relationship, in moments where you would normally react, that's where healing becomes visible. Chapter 12. What healing looks like in real life. This is where everything becomes real, because understanding your patterns is one thing, but life doesn't happen in theory. It happens in moments, unexpected ones, emotional ones, the kind that used to trigger you instantly. And this is where healing shows up, not when everything is calm, but when something happens and you respond differently, even slightly. Let's walk through this. Situation 1. Someone ignores you. Before you notice it immediately, the delay, the silence, the change in energy, and your mind starts working. Did I do something? Why are they acting like this? Something feels off. You check your phone. You replay the last conversation. You feel that familiar tension. Now, healing looks different. You still notice it. That doesn't go away. But instead of immediately reacting, you pause. You recognize the feeling, and you ask yourself, do I actually know what this means? And the answer is usually no. So instead of creating a story, you let it be incomplete. You don't chase. You don't over-explain. You don't assume. And just like that, you protect your peace. That's healing. Not perfection, a different response. Situation 2. Someone says something that triggers you. Before you react instantly, emotionally, defensively, or you shut down completely, and later you think, I could have handled that better. Now you still feel it, that emotional spike, but instead of reacting immediately, you pause, even for a few seconds, and in that pause you create space to choose, and maybe your response is softer, more grounded, or maybe you choose not to respond at all. Not because you're avoiding, but because you're deciding, and that's the difference. You're no longer being controlled by the moment. You're choosing your response within it. That's healing. Situation 3. You want to shut down before you feel something. Discomfort, tension, and your instinct is to go quiet, to withdraw, to avoid saying what you actually feel. Now, you still feel that urge, but you notice it, and instead of disappearing, you stay, even if it's uncomfortable, even if it's small, and maybe you say something simple. Hey, that didn't feel right to me. It doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be honest. And that moment builds something, safety in your own voice. That's healing. Situation 4, you start overthinking. Before your mind loops, you replay, you analyze, you search for meaning, and you get stuck. Now you notice the loop starting, and instead of feeding it, you interrupt it. You bring yourself back to what's real. What actually happened, not what it means, just what happened, and slowly, the intensity fades, because you didn't give it more energy. That's healing. Situation 5, someone else is upset. Before you absorb it, you feel responsible. You try to fix it. You adjust yourself. Now you still care, but you don't carry it. You listen. You support, but you don't take it on as yours. You allow them to have their experience without losing yourself in it. And that changes everything, because now your energy stays yours. That's healing. And when you look at all of this together, you start to see something clearly. Healing is not about becoming a completely different person. It's about responding differently in the same situations, again and again, until it becomes natural, until it becomes who you are. And that takes time. But every time you choose differently, you are changing something, not just the moment, but the pattern. And over time, those patterns lose their hold. Not because they disappear completely, but because you no longer follow them the same way. And that's where your life begins to feel different. Not perfect, but lighter, more stable, more yours. And if this is starting to feel real, if you can see yourself in these moments, stay with this. And if you're serious about applying this in your real life, not just understanding it, subscribe and turn on notifications, because this is where healing becomes something you actually live. And if one of these situations felt especially familiar, something you've experienced recently, share it in the comments, because sometimes seeing it clearly is what helps you respond differently next time. Now we come to the final part, because you've seen the patterns, you understand the signs, you know how to start healing. But there's one final shift that brings all of this together, the way you see yourself. Because healing doesn't just change your reactions, it changes your identity. Chapter 13. You are not broken, you adapted. Let this be the moment everything settles. Not everything in your life, but how you see yourself. Because up until now, you've been trying to understand your reactions, your patterns, your emotions, and maybe for the first time things are starting to make sense, not perfectly, but clearly. You see the signs, you recognize the patterns, you understand the triggers, and more importantly, you understand why. And that changes something deep, because now you're not asking, what's wrong with me? You're asking, what did I learn that I'm still living from? And that question removes shame, it removes blame, it removes that quiet voice that says, you should be further by now, because now you see it differently. You didn't become this way by accident. You adapted to protect yourself, to survive emotionally, to make sense of things when you didn't have the tools you have now. And those adaptations worked. At the time, they made sense. They kept you safe. But now, you're no longer in those same situations, and what once protected you is now limiting you. Not because you're broken, but because you've outgrown it. And that's the shift. You're not trying to fix yourself. You're learning to update yourself. Gently, consciously, with awareness, because everything you've experienced, everything you've carried, everything you've responded to has shaped how you see the world, how you see people, how you see yourself. But none of it is permanent, because what was learned can be unlearned. What was built can be rebuilt, and what felt automatic can become intentional. That's healing, not becoming someone else, but becoming someone who is no longer controlled by the past. And that doesn't happen all at once. It happens in moments, small ones, quiet ones, the moments where you pause instead of react, you speak instead of shut down, you let go instead of overthink, you choose calm instead of chaos. Those moments are everything, because they build something new, a new pattern, a new response, a new identity. And over time, those moments become who you are, not forced, not practiced, natural. And one day you'll notice something subtle but powerful. You won't react the same way anymore. You won't overthink the same situations. You won't carry what isn't yours. You won't feel pulled into patterns that once controlled you. And you won't even remember exactly when it changed, because it didn't happen all at once. It happened gradually, as you chose differently, again and again. That's what this is about. not perfection, transformation. And before you move on, there's something you need to hear clearly. You are not too emotional. You are not hard to love. You are not someone who is too much. You are someone who learned how to respond to certain environments. And now you're learning something new, something better, something that actually supports you. And that is something to be proud of, even if you're still in the process. Especially if you're still in the process, because awareness alone is already a shift. So don't rush this. Don't force it. Don't expect yourself to be perfect. Just stay aware, stay intentional, stay committed to understanding yourself, because that's what leads to real change. Now, before you leave this, pause for a second. Think about everything you've just heard, the signs, the patterns, the moments that felt familiar, the parts that made you stop and think, this is me. And ask yourself, what is one thing I'm going to do differently now? Not everything, just one thing, because that's how this begins. And if this audiobook helped you, not just understand something, but feel understood, then stay connected. If you're serious about becoming someone who is no longer controlled by their past, subscribe and turn on notifications, because this is where real healing continues. And if something in this book truly resonated with you, something that made you see yourself differently, share it in the comments. Say which part hit you the most, because sometimes putting it into words is what makes the shift real. And if you know someone who keeps going through the same emotional pattern, send this to them, not because they're broken, but because they might finally understand themselves. And that can change everything. But this is not the end. Not really, because once you start healing, something else begins to happen, something deeper. You don't just notice your patterns, you start noticing something else, your boundaries, your standards, what you tolerate and what you no longer can. And that shift changes your relationships completely, because healing doesn't just change how you feel, it changes what you allow. And most people are not prepared for that part, because it means outgrowing things, people, dynamics, versions of yourself, and that brings a different kind of challenge. Not reacting, but choosing. Not understanding, but deciding. And that's what we're going into next. A deeper level. One most people reach, but don't know how to navigate, where healing turns into boundaries, and boundaries turn into transformation. So stay ready, because the next audiobook won't just help you understand yourself. It will show you how to protect the version of you that's finally healing. Don't miss that.